It's a really great honor to be here. Let me first apologize for my voice. I think I got sick in Philadelphia on the way to the airport, but then on the plane I got sicker and sicker. So it affected my voice, and I asked God, what are you doing? And I thought I would hear him say something, and I was afraid that he might say, I don't want you to speak to the Korean seminary, or I want to protect them from you. But he's graciously allowed me to speak at least this way. Okay, so some people think this is a better voice than my real voice. So maybe it's a blessing. The title I put up here this morning is a little off. It means the same thing, but Dr. Jung correctly put the title that we had kind of talked about. But if you put that title with this title, you probably will get a better sense of what we're going to be talking about today. So I don't know whether I should, maybe it's going to be feedback. I'll just move this. I'll use it this way. So if I move the mic without thinking and you can't hear me, just raise your hand and wave. Okay. All right. So let me introduce what I'm going to be talking about today, specifically in the light of what Dean Kim spoke about, the missional church movement. As he said, quite accurately, the missional church movement the missional church movement was, in fact, this movement that realized that the North American church was in deep trouble. We had lost contact with our culture, and we ceased living authentic Christian life that was beautiful and attractive to American culture. For example, we dropped the ball, we fumbled the ball on the race issue, for example. We dropped the ball on the race issue. We were happy to send missionaries to, say, Africa, but we were not happy to allow Black Americans to be in our church services. Right? That, of course, was a betrayal of the gospel, and the culture rightly said, that's ugly. That is ugly. And through a series of those kinds of events, right, the church in North America has declined and no longer commands respect, and the gospel has been impugned, sullied, or dirtied, something like that, right? So the missional church movement said, we've got to rethink what is a church for. And their answer was to realize that the church is here to do God's mission. And so one of the great ways of phrasing that was this, that it's not that God has a mission for the church, but rather God has a church for his mission. And so that then led missional theological thinkers into the question, what precisely is the mission of God? What is the mission of God? If that's why the church exists, then what is it? What is the mission of God? And again, the discussion is still continuing. It's not final, but I will cut that short because that's not what we want to focus on today. But essentially, this is the way I would phrase God's mission. Right? So this kind of underlies this Christotelic reading of the scriptures, if you want to. I'm not going to focus on this explicitly today, but it is the foundation of everything I'm saying today. And so the mission of God, the way I would, the party or the school within the missional theology that I'm closest to, and perhaps Missional Seminary is closest to, would phrase it this way, that the mission of God, God who is Trinity, The mission of God is the infinite expansion of his loving community throughout the created order by means of his image bearers. Okay, so let me repeat that. The mission of God, of course, who is Trinity, is the infinite expansion of his loving community throughout the created order by means of his image bearers. So that, if you stop and think about that, the very notion of God being community is one that, looking back, we might find hints in the Old Testament, but not of the number or of explicit quality that we would ever think about God as Trinity in the Old Testament. Looking back, we do. Again, we have an Old Testament professor. Perhaps that might be a discussion question later. But in my opinion, we would never discover God as Trinity, as community, from the Old Testament alone. We're dependent for that crucial, foundational understanding of God with his ultimate and final revelation in his Son. Right? So that's an amazing datum to think about for a bit. Just dwell on that for a minute. That God reveals something ultimate about himself, something so crucial about himself, only near the end or the climax of the story, when he himself enters into the story in order to fulfill that mission of the infinite expansion of his loving community. And it's only in the light of Christ that we get the explicit data, or if that's the right word, right? But we get the revelation that allows us to start thinking about God and groping towards a full formulation of God as Trinity, as loving community. That structure of discovery of God as Trinity, as loving community, and its revelation in Scripture is what I mean here, and other people mean when they use the term Christotelic. God did not reveal himself as Trinity before, but then decisively, at the climax of the story, the turning point in the story, God says, "This is who I am." In other words, it's at the telos, when Christ comes, that we get this very crucial datum. That datum does not call into question and destroy or relativize the wonderful picture of God that the Old Testament gives us, right? But it brings it to this climactic fulfillment and enrichment that then becomes the ground for God's people to launch in his mission in all the variety of ways that we could talk about. And Dean Kim and I, for 4 hours, are just like, talking back and forth about, wow, this is amazing. So, in other words, he's going to leave now. He's going to come teach for us at Missional. I just want to let you know don't repeat that. That's not true. Okay. All right. So, what I want to do today is to show how this idea of a Christotelic reading of Scripture doesn't just apply to our reading about God as Trinity or the doctrine of God in the Bible. And of course, you do realize that even with the doctrine of Trinity, it isn't completely resolved in the time of Christ, right? The church then has to wrestle with the data of the Old Testament and with what Jesus brings into the picture. And it takes another 2.5 centuries for the church to finally come out with a formulation of the doctrine of the Trinity that does justice to all the data. But of course, it doesn't explain all the data. It's a mystery still, right? The Trinity is a mystery. It's a way of saying, this is true, this is true, this is true, and we have to say they're all true. But we can't necessarily explain it. But what we're trying to do today is to show that this Christotelic movement in Scripture is normal in everything that the Scripture teaches us. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give one example, and I'll check my watch, and if it looks like we still have a lot of time, then I will give a second example. If it's not a lot of time, then after this example I will talk more programmatically about Christotelic hermeneutic and missional Christotelic hermeneutic more descriptively, right? And then if there's time, I will use another example. And in your handouts, your sheets there, you have two examples. The second possible example is in your handout. And the other example is one that we will not talk about today. So when I teach this, I've got all kinds of handout of examples, but I had to kind of pick which ones to use today here. So our first example today. There we go. We're going to be looking at the wisdom literature, and in particular, looking at Job's anguish. Okay, we're looking at the wisdom literature at the beginning, generally, but then we're going to focus on Job. And as you can see here, the title here is Job's Anguish and the Anguish of God. A survey of Job in the light of the cross, or in the light of the climax of the great story, which is Jesus Christ. Everybody understand so far? Are there any questions right now? I don't want to leave anybody behind. We'll have, of course, a question time later, but if there's something that just doesn't make sense, and you think Steve Taylor is very stupid or something, please ask a question. Okay. Good. So, Job definitely belongs in the Old Testament to the part of the Old Testament that we call wisdom literature. And the other two major documents within that wisdom literature are Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And I'm sure that you're all aware of both of these and of Job as well. So I'm counting on a reservoir of biblical literacy on your part, right? You might know Proverbs more than, say, the other two, but I'm hoping that you know at least one of these in your own personal experience. So what is Proverbs? Proverbs is a collection of maxims or aphorisms or sayings urging the reader to prosper. How? By fearing God and by developing and living out certain attitudes and habits towards others and towards one's own responsibilities. So you can remember Proverbs, there's all these wonderful short thoughts that you can read very quickly, meditate on, and then in most of Proverbs, there's no connection of that thought with the next thought, right? And in fact, in one chapter of Proverbs, I think it's chapter 16, there's two thoughts right together that say the opposite. Don't answer a fool according to his folly. And the very next verse is, answer a fool according to his folly. Right? That sounds like a contradiction, but the point is you're supposed to stop and think how each of these apply, right? So I think we've all had some experience with my mother's life verse, which is my Old Testament life verse, is this is crazy. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Right? Wonderful stuff there, right? In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. That's going to be challenged today. Okay? We're going to think about that for a minute. Ecclesiastes, the other of the three, is a discourse. It's not Proverbs anymore. It's actually discursive. There's an argument that's being developed, right? But it's a discursive, and it's by a wise man, some people think Solomon, who discovers that human life under the sun is vanity. It's meaninglessness. So, in other words, human life, the phrase of under the sun, in the plane that we live on, right, is largely just meaningless and vanities, right? So how do we cope with that is the question that the Ecclesiastes is writing. In other words, Ecclesiastes is already much, much darker, much, much more pessimistic than Proverbs. Proverbs says, do this, do that, fear the Lord, yep, and everything's great, right? Ecclesiastes says, life is just meaningless. But you can cope with it by enjoying simple pleasures of daily life. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't overreach. You know, in the making of many books, there's more vanity, right? That says something about all of us scholars and making more books, right? Don't do that, but rather enjoy the simple things. Eat and drink and work. And he might have said, I don't know, Solomon had, I don't know how many wives, but your spouse and your children or whatever. Unfortunately, he doesn't say that, right? He doesn't really talk about that. And then finally, when he sums up at the end, saying that all this has to be undergirded with an attitude of fear God and keep His commandments, right near the end of the book. So that's the first two books here. Sorry, they're going to lean down. I come across very loud. Okay, so Proverbs and Ecclesiastes each claim to have understood wisdom or the meaning of life and have a wise perspective on that meaning, but they don't entirely agree. Already with Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, there's a tension, because this kind of raises a question: is that okay? Does God not only allow tension in the Bible, but more importantly, does God put tension in the Bible? Okay, that's the real question. Or is God in the Bible trying to remove all tension from the Bible? Okay, so we'll come around to these kinds of discussions later. Well, Job, though, however, is going to move beyond both of these options, and he's going to probe a painful and very baffling mystery. And that's why we're going to focus primarily on Job at this point. So look at Job for a minute here. Look at what Job says about wisdom. And notice the kind of pessimism and humility here, kind of like Ecclesiastes, but it's higher. It's not Job. The darkness of Job is not because Job has done all these things and tried out all these things and done these questionable things, and but it's also kind of dark, right? Kind of pessimistic. Job says about wisdom, but where shall wisdom be found? Where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it's not found in the land of the living. Right? Are we in the land of the living? Right? We're in the land of the living. We're alive, right? Okay. And Job's saying, it's not found here. Right? He goes on, it's hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed even from the birds of the air. The animals that can reach perspective and look down and see more than we can see. Right? It's even hidden from the birds of the air. But that's not all. Look at verse 22. Abaddon and death say, there's a place of the dead. What we might call it in the typical Hebrew literature, Sheol. Right? Abaddon and death say, we have heard a rumor of it. We've heard some little whispers of it with our ears. Well, we don't know either where it is. Boy, that's tough. Right? Now contrast this with Proverbs for a minute. In Proverbs 8, wisdom is pictured in Proverbs 8 as a woman who cries out. And let me just read this. Does not wisdom call out? Right? Much louder than I can today. Screams out, calling out, in the marketplace. Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside all the ways, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. So, Dean Kim was telling me that his daughter has done some street preaching. Amazing. Well, this is what wisdom's doing here. She's going out on the streets of Seoul and starts crying out, listen to me, listen to me. Right? Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud, to you, O men, I call, and my cry is to children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence. Right? O fools, learn sense. Riches and honor are with me. In other words, blessing. Enduring wealth and righteousness are with me. And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways, for whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from God. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me actually love death. In other words, Proverbs says, there's no mystery. Wisdom is calling out to you all the time. It's in public places if you'll only listen. Job says, there's wisdom. Nobody knows where it is. In fact, it doesn't dwell with us. You see how the tension between Ecclesiastes and Proverbs is even, what we say in English, torqued up, like when you're tightening a screw, right? It makes things even more difficult. There's a tension here about it. And once again, I'm asking you to keep your mind open here. This is not a problem with the Bible. It's a tension that God has placed there. And not to see it is to misread it, right? Think about that for a minute. Okay. So, you know the story of Job, that he is a prosperous man. He is, in fact, he seems to be the Proverbs man, right? He's the righteous one who seeks God, fears God, and he's been blessed with 7,000 camel and whatever. He's got all these riches, and then suddenly one day everything is taken from him, including his children. All his children were all taken from him. You all remember that story, right? Okay, good. Again, let it hit you. I've got kids. I've got 5 kids, not as many as Job. But I tell you, that would destroy me if God took those kids from me, especially all in one day, right? And if that's not enough, Job was then afflicted in his body with horrible sores that were painful, and he had to scrape them with potsherds, right, with pottery, broken pottery. And that's the way he's left, right there. And he is in just terrible despair. And we're told that his wife comes to him and says, Job, why don't you just curse God and die? Your life is over. Right? Something terribly wrong. Just curse God and die. Right? But Job had some good friends. And they hear about this, and they come. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, his 3 friends. And they had heard about what happened, and they're aghast, and they come to visit him. And these guys are really good friends. They're better friends than I have ever been to anyone. Because you know what they do? They sit with him on the ground for 7 days. Quiet. Mourning. They sit with him. I visit some people in the hospital. Maybe I read scripture or pray. An hour, 2 hours maybe. Maybe I can think of one example overnight because of whatever. That's it. No, not these weeks, not a week. Okay. These are not bad men. These are good men. And their actions are described in this way so that we know these are good friends of Job. And Job gives a speech to them, basically saying, I wish God, I curse the nails with them. And I don't understand what's happening. But at this point, the friends start to speak. And most of the book of Job are the alternating speeches of Job and one of his friends. And they speak in order. So Eliphaz, Job speaks, Eliphaz is the first to answer. And then Job answers Eliphaz, and then the next man, Bildad, speaks. And then Job answers Bildad, and etc. And then finally Zophar speaks. And then they go around again. And then finally, there's a third cycle where only Eliphaz and Bildad speak, and Zophar does not speak again. And that's an interesting fact, because all the people in the first round of speeches, all the three friends, they start out sympathetic. They start out with understanding. They start out with gentleness in their voice. But Zophar is the least sympathetic. But he's still sympathetic the first time, right? The second round, because Job answers them, right? He doesn't listen and accept. He answers them back. The second time, Eliphaz has a lot more edge to him, you know, and Bildad even more. And Zophar, whew, man, he gets really angry. And then, of course, it's the last round, and it's as if Zophar says, forget it, I'm not talking to you anymore. And he's not part of this discussion anymore. Okay, so I don't know who the guy here is, Zophar, but you know, you can think about that, the painting, it's an effective painting. Notice the wife over here in the dark shadows. And you can see, she's a Jewish woman, obviously. Oy vey. No, oy vey. All right. Okay. Is this following what you know? I mean, am I being true so far? Okay. All right. So what's the message of Job's friends? Now we could literally spend, this could be a course on Job, right? And we could go step by step through all the arguments and the key verses, and it's, by the way, it's all in beautiful poetry. And when I took Hebrew, took multiple years of Semitic languages, and the professor who taught the high level, he said, okay, now you are ready for Job, because Job is really, really hard to translate and to understand, but very beautiful too, right? So, but I can summarize the message in this way, and again, if you have read Job a lot and I've left something out, make sure you bring this up in question and answer. They make this point first: God is sovereign, God is omniscient, He's omnipotent, holy, and just. Right? Over and over again, they all say this. Right? They remind Job of this. God has made known His rules for living. Of course, that would be, for example, they don't actually cite law, they don't cite the language of the Pentateuch. Though much of what they say echoes the legal material of Israel. But they do cite wisdom. So their talks to Job are filled with the maxims and platitudes of Proverbs. Right? They don't not quote, right, Proverbs, but the same thoughts over and over again to Job. And they also talk about how God rewards those who obey Him and punishes those who don't. And then they go on to press Job and say, therefore, you must have disobeyed God. And they all call upon him to acknowledge that, to admit that, to repent. And if he does, they tell him that God will surely restore you. God will restore you. So I'd like to give a couple of verses from the different speeches of these men. So let's read these couple. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have refuge. Well, they're saying this to Job, who has just lost his children, right? Ergo, you haven't properly feared the Lord. Because if you had been God-fearing, you would have your children. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. And of course, Job is just surrounded with death. Right? The fear of the Lord, chapter 19:23 here, the fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied, and he will not be visited by harm. Well, Job has not only been visited by harm, he's been invaded by harm, right? And the invaders have taken up residence in his life. See, there's deep irony here. This is a carefully constructed book. It's not just thrown everything for us. This is highly poetic and highly insightful here. The writer here, the human writer, is very skilled, and God, of course, is inspiring this. And we need to feel the anguish, right? And maybe we can't feel it until we have some Job-like experiences in our life. Now, do you see anything wrong with their messaging? The three friends. I've summarized it, and maybe I've left out something that would really help. So please, inject other themes if you want to. Do you see anything wrong though with it? And we don't need to have necessarily a discussion here, but I want you to formulate it. Where would you point? At what point would you say, here's something wrong? It'd be kind of hard, really, if you know Proverbs very well. Job does, though, because Job refuses to agree with them on the central point that they're making. He does agree with some things, okay? He will also say, God's sovereign. God's omniscient. God's omnipotent. He's holy and just. But for Job, that just raises the problem deeper. How can God, who is this, do what he's done? Now, this is the problem of theodicy. How can a good God do what has happened, is the question here, right? If God wasn't these things, sovereign, omniscient, omnipotent, holy, and just, then, hey, it's terrible, but it's not a problem. Not something it blows your mind. It's just a tragedy, right? And Job, even he knows Proverbs. You can tell he's a man who lived it. He admits that there's usually reward for those who obey God, and oftentimes punishment for those who do not. But in Job, there are a number of speeches where Job says, I did obey him, and look at me. And he also says in speeches, and look at that man over there. He's wealthy and wicked, and he has everything. And of course, we have that experience too, don't we? Don't the wicked prosper oftentimes in our world? How does Proverbs work? That's what Job's asking. Right? Here's where he disagrees completely. I'm not guilty. Sorry. I'm simply not guilty, he says, over and over again. He never budges on this point. He doesn't say, maybe there was that one problem and God rightly can smite me for that. He never gives in on this point. And moreover, he goes on to say, I want to plead my case. I want to confront God himself. I want to speak face to face with God and plead my case. And he says, if I could do that, I know I would win. I know I win because I have truth on my side on this issue, on this particular issue. Okay, I hope you're a little bit uncomfortable, because this is what happens when we read the Bible very honestly and just kind of dwell on it and don't bring our theology very quickly to rescue us, right? The Bible's not meant to do that. And I'm not talking about Old Testament only. Even in New Testament, there are things that we're meant to struggle with precisely because we're reading it honestly and not allowing our theological systems to come and immediately cover over a problem, right? And I can say this why, because I'm convinced that God is the one who put that there, and if I wrestle with it, on the other side, there's more glorious, more amazing truth to be seen. But if I cut it short, I will stay under the sun, so to speak. Okay, moving on here. So we're going to see a few quotations here where some of these themes that we just mentioned about Job here come through. There's a lot of wonderful passages in Job, especially in his sermons and his speeches. And by the way, be careful when you use Job in your sermon, because in your teaching or sermons, because most of Job is not Job speaking. And at the end of Job, you find out that God was displeased with the things that his friends said. So I've heard pastors and friends of mine quote Zophar, of all people. They didn't realize it. You know, oh, this is a great truth, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And well, it's in the Bible, right? But it's in the Bible as the speech of Zophar, right? And Zophar is, we're told at the end of the book, God was displeased with what he said. And one of the key texts in Job's responses is chapter 13. This is a very, very hard-hitting text here. Very short too, but I want us to read through it very slowly. Job, in answer to, it's really the answer to the first round of speeches. He says, look, behold, my eye, my own eye here, has seen all this. Everything you've said to me, I've seen this already, right? My ear has heard and understood it already. What you know, I know, right? You don't know any more than me. Remember, I was the Proverbs man. You know, I was the prosperous one, right? Well, you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you, but, he says, rather than talk to you, I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to argue my case with God. I don't really want to argue with you guys. Right? I want to talk with God about this. Then look at verse 5. Oh, that you would keep silent, and your silence would be your wisdom. Isn't that amazing? It's kind of a warning to us too. We're so quick to go to someone in pain, right? And quote something, Romans 8:28 or whatever. And you can see from the look in their eyes, they say, oh, I wish you hadn't even said that. I wish you'd just been silent and wept with me. Right? Hear now my argument and listen to the pleadings of my lips. And here's, this verse is, when I studied this the first time and really read it years ago, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Will you speak falsely for God? And will you speak deceitfully for God? Will you show partiality toward God? Think about it for a minute. What is Job saying? That's exactly whom we are supposed to speak partial to, because God's always right. But Job is actually saying, no. In this case here, you should not be defending God. You have no basis. You don't even know what's going on yet. Right? And this has implications for all of us, by the way. I've been, one of the things one of my interests is Islam, and the toughness of reaching out to Muslims. And I've gone occasionally to mosques in Philadelphia and been part of groups of Christians who debate or have discussions with Muslims. And I've sat and listened to Christians make utterly false claims about the Bible, for example, in the heat of an argument with the Muslim. right? And I literally did not even know what to say, because I didn't want to, in that moment, correct the Christian over the Muslim. And so I kept quiet in these situations. But I should have read later, verse 7, to these good brothers of mine, will you speak falsely for God? And will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality towards him? Will you plead the case for God? And then look at verse 9. Will it be well with you when he searches you out? When God looks at you and says, why did you speak falsely to that Muslim? Why did you defend the Bible falsely to that liberal person? Falsehood is never in God's will, even if it's for a good end. Right? Job is saying, why are you doing this? Right? When God turns his eyes on you, will he be pleased with what you're doing? Or can you deceive God as one deceives a man? He will surely rebuke you if in secret you show partiality to him. If you say, yeah, I know, I see this, but I'm going to keep that a secret, and I'll always speak partial towards God. Job says God knows that, and he will come after you someday. Will not his majesty terrify you, and the dread of him fall upon you? And then verse 12 here, the very title of Proverbs, the very word that names Proverbs is here. Your maxims are proverbs of ashes. They have no life-giving moisture. It's like putting ashes in your mouth. Your defenses are defenses of clay. So who's right? Job or his friends? I've already set that up, and nobody's going to be, you're not going to want to, at this point, say, well, it's his friends, right? But we oftentimes read Job as if his friends are right. And oftentimes I've heard this over and over again. There must be something really wrong with Job or his theology. I even heard one pastor very recently talk about Job doesn't understand justification by faith. And God is sending suffering on him so he can finally come around to understanding justification by faith. Well, that's just utterly irrelevant. That is not the issue in the book of Job. Okay. But we're not really left to guess here. And there's really no room for disagreement about who's right. Because the book of Job is very, very clear on this, as we'll see. So it's at this point that we see Job kind of lifting up on wings and leaving Proverbs and Ecclesiastes on a different plane. Right? This is kind of surpassing, or we might say, surpassing Israelite wisdom, traditional wisdom. And it surpasses it in this way. The book of Job has already and will continue to tell us that all this discussion and all of Job's suffering is part of a bigger drama. And you can tell from this painting that the drama involves the purposes of God on the one hand, and also some dark figure in the clouds over here as well, right? And there's something else going on. It's much, much bigger than just the question of how Proverbs work in the book of Job. And here's the signal in the book of Job that this is true. And it's interesting that this signal comes right at the beginning of Job. And then it's reinforced at the end of Job. So it's as if there's a container for all Job's speeches and Bildad and Eliphaz and Zophar. But the two framing, the beginning and frame it. And here's the beginning frame. The beginning frame is this. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So Satan is apparently, he has this elite status of these angelic beings, or at this point they're called sons of God. He's able to come before God, right? I think myself that when Jesus later in Luke chapter 10, when the 70 come back, and remember he sent out 70 disciples to go on a missions trip, and they come back all happy that they've been able to cast out demons and do miracles. And Jesus says, the first thing he says is, yes, I saw Satan fall from heaven. Meaning, Satan can never go before God again and accuse his people. But at this point, he can still do it. Right? Well, look at this. It goes on to say, Satan was there, and the Lord said to Satan, by the way, the word here is Lord, it's Yahweh, which is why I don't think Job is an ancient book, pre-Israelite. I don't think it's ancient. The word Yahweh is being used here. The Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said, well, certainly then have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Proverbs, remember? All the big refrain, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So right at the beginning, we find out this is a blameless man who fears God. Be careful that you're going to bring a charge against Job, because God does it. Right? Don't try to explain the book by doing that. That's the wrong way to go. Right? That's what the friends did. Right? So then look what Satan said. Here's where we get into the mystery of the suffering. This is where it really starts to go so deep that it will go so high that Proverbs and Ecclesiastes have nothing to say about this. Right? Satan says to God, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands and his possessions, and have increased the land. But stretch out your hand and touch him. Touch all that he has, right? And he will curse you to your face. You see what's going on here? Satan is actually saying to God, Lord, Yahweh, do you think that this piece of carbon, we're carbon-based units, right? Do you think this piece of flesh is part of this material creation you've made, embodied stuff? Do you think he really loves you and that he really respects you? No, he's like a dog. He knows who feeds him. Right? Stop feeding him. Stop giving him stuff and see if he really loves you. See if he really fears you. See if he really cares about you at all. And he says, I guarantee you, if you do that, he will curse you to your face. And this is the language that echoes earlier when his wife said, curse God and die, right? And Job said, I curse the day I was born, but the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed, not curse, be the name of the Lord. So what's going on in the book of Job? We can say, right here, we're going to talk more, and we'll see a slide of it, but we can say this much. Think about this. This is the struggle of humanity, right? It's the struggle, it's the question of, will the human race, will human beings, will people like us love God because of who he is, or do we love him because of what we can get? In other words, is it possible for human beings to be part of the mission of God? Really? Is it possible for human beings to be part of his loving community? Or are we driven always by self-interest? Satan is saying, I know these guys. They are driven by self-interest. And you take that away, they're going to curse you to your faith. And Job could have easily said, remember Adam? Adam and Eve had everything. You did bless them. And somehow, even in the perfect environment, they cursed you to your face, in essence, right? They didn't do that. They turned against you. They wanted to usurp your position. That's just part of their DNA. They will do this no matter what. And so there's a bet. God and Satan enter into this bet. It's not a frivolous bet. God isn't simply saying, okay, let's have a bet. Yeah, I don't care what happens to Job. Let's just have a bet. It's really the bet. The bet involves, was God wise and was he good in creating image bearers to begin with? Or was this a foolish thing to do to begin with? Doomed to failure. Satan says it's doomed to failure. In fact, if some of the ancient the English poets are right, that's the reason why Satan rebelled, is because he found out that God is going to crown these carbon-based units with honor when they don't deserve it. Okay, everybody following here? Okay. So, we the readers are told that Job is right. But again, the story is constructed in such a way that Job does not know any of this. He's suffering without any knowledge of any of this. Because we're told, as part of the frameworks, the beginning and ending framework of the story, is not an item in the story itself. That's the agony of it. That Job is suffering not knowing this. Right? It's really, really hard. So here it is. Here's Yahweh and Satan dickering about this. Job is innocent. He suffers for a different reason from what ancient wisdom understood. Ancient wisdom was, you do God's will, he blesses you. Right? It also opens up the possibility that that's why you do God's will, is so that you'll be blessed, which is exactly Satan's point. Right? All right, so I'm not sure why that happened again. The reason, though, is a deep one, as I've already talked about, and it's awful in a sense. It's awful in the sense it's awe-inspiring. And it goes to the very depths of God's plan to create embodied creatures, embodied image bearers in his creation. Can these weak and embodied creatures really be part of God's loving community? And Job, of course, doesn't know about God's discussion with Satan, but he knows that he has to deal with God. That's the amazing thing about Job, is he doesn't turn away from God. He continues throughout the whole discourse dealing with God. God, let me speak to you. Let me confront you to your face. He said over and over. He never turns away. He doesn't say this happened because of Satan. He doesn't say that Satan did this to me. Right? He says, whatever has happened to me, God is ultimately responsible. And he's the one that I have to deal with. And that's the right attitude, by the way. Right? Don't ever think, because the language of spiritual warfare oftentimes is language that says, oh, somehow Satan got through and now we're suffering, or we can't get enough money for our ministry or something. There is spiritual warfare, but all that warfare still happens within God's control. And our first response should not be, cast out Satan, but rather, God, who have I but you in help? That's the way to do it. But Job is also really worried about God now. Very worried about God. There are a number of passages like this where he says, and now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. I cry, O God, to you for help. Okay, this is second person, singular. He's addressing God now. O God, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. I'm there, I'm crying out to you, and there you are, and you're looking at me, and that's all you do. You look. Wow. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me, God. You toss me about in a storm. Wow. Isn't this a sin? Isn't this what's wrong with Job? Not at the end of the book. God will never come back and say, Job, that's it. Well, you cried here. You should never have said this. Right? That's not apparently not the problem at all with Job. In fact, this attitude towards God here is authentic. It's real. It shows that Job is not a dog who simply deals with God when God is feeding him. No, it shows that Job is deeply committed to God, deeply committed in that relationship, and he is questioning, how can God do this to me? Because I am utterly dependent upon him. But yet God tosses me about in the storm. That language of the storm, God tossing Job in a storm, is very important in Job. It's used several times. Here's another text, back in chapter 13, which we quoted earlier. Behold, he says, like a good lawyer, I've prepared my case. And I've got my brief here. I know I shall be in the right. Who is there who will contend with me? That is, who's going to answer me? For then I would be silent and die. If somebody can actually answer me and say, here's where you're wrong, he says, I'll be silent and die. Right? Then he says, he's referring to God, he's talking to God now, only grant me two things. I'm only asking you, God, two things right now. Then I will not hide myself from your face. First, God, withdraw your hand far from me. So he's assuming that God is somehow the one who's involved in all of his pain. Withdraw your hand right now. And second, let not dread of you terrify me. And then, if you do that, call, and I will stand before you and argue my case. I will answer, and let me speak, and then you can reply to me. In other words, he wants a face-to-face encounter with God. He wants to plead his case. He is totally convinced in the beginning there that he is right. His conscience does not at all condemn him. He's only worried, though, that God will appear in this confrontation in such a way that terrifies him, and that he will not be able to speak in that encounter. He said, God, if you would just simply take your hand away and take the dread of you away, then I can come before you, and then I have hope that I can plead my case and we can resolve this issue. I tell you, I get, okay. How are we doing on time? So Job hopes, he cries out in the middle of Job also several times for a supernatural helper. So he realizes this problem of how does he discuss with God. He says, I need help. And he knows that he can't get God to help him here, so he's not asking God for help. He says, I need someone else to come beside me. Probably thinking about, in the language of Job, of angelic supernatural help here. So he says, even now my witness is in heaven. There's got to be someone in heaven who looks out for people like me and who can stand beside me in the middle of this law court scene as I argue my case. My intercessor is my friend as my eyes pour out tears to God. Notice here, the intercessor is not God, right? In this case. My intercessor contends with God on behalf of man as a man pleads for his friend. In other words, there's got to be someone in God's presence, not a Satan accusing. There's got to be someone else there who stands up for human beings, who can come alongside and shield them from the terror so they can actually have dealings with God, like Job is saying. And he says it several times in different ways. Look at this last one here. How can I answer him and choose my words to argue with him, although I am innocent? I could not answer him. I could only plead with my judge for mercy. If I summoned him and he answered me, I would not believe that I would be able, that he would be listening to my voice. He who crushes me with a storm and multiplies my wounds for no reason. He does not allow me to recover my breath. And if it's a matter of strength, well, most certainly he is a strong one. And if it's a matter of justice, he will certainly say, who will summon me? Who will bring me to court, right? Although I am innocent, Job said, I know I'm innocent. My mouth would still condemn me when I see God. Right? That's why I ask God, remove the terror, remove it from me. Although I am blameless, I would declare myself in God's presence perverse. So he's worried about God. How can he come before God without help? Now God shows up at the end of Job. And twice we're told this. The Lord answered Job out of a storm. That should hit you like a brick. In other words, God shows up to finally hears the summons, and he comes so that Job they can both confront each other face to face. But he doesn't come shielding Job and removing the terror. He comes in a storm and asking, who is this that darkens counsel by word without knowledge? And then again in 40, they ask the question is, dress for action like a man, and I will question you now, and you make it known to me. And that's the way it goes. That's the way the rest of the book of Job goes until the very end, till the frame at the end. Whew, boy. I hope you get the sense of this. In other words, Job is asking for an explanation because he knows he's innocent. And he's asking to be allowed to be in his right mind when he can talk to God. And God shows up in such a way that Job had already feared he would. And Job cannot possibly be in his right mind in front of that. He shows up in a storm. So God shows up, but Job gets the answer that he feared, not the answer he was looking for. No explanation, no words of comfort, no assurances. That'll come in the frame. It will not come in God's talk with Job. Basically, God says to Job, I'm all powerful. I have all wisdom. Who are you? And we can add, shut up. Be quiet. God blows Job away in a storm. That doesn't destroy him, I don't mean that. I just mean there's no meeting of the minds. Job can't plead himself for himself. Is this all God has to say? Well, the frame of Job tells us that God actually thought Job was blameless. And he's very angry with his friends. And Job has to actually offer sacrifices for his friends so that God won't punish them. And then God restores everything that Job lost, plus more, and gives him more children. And even we're told that he gave him 3 daughters. And interestingly, a really interesting little fact, they're given names. I can't remember all of them, but Cassia and Beulah, I can't remember the third one. That's really interesting to me. He gives them daughters and they're given names. The sons are not given names. But that's the frame. If God had done what he did to Job, to me, and he said, hey Steve, now here, go back to Missional, you can be professor again, you can have a car, and look, I'm going to give you new children. And here are their names. I would say, no deal, God. I love the children I have already. Thank you. No children are going to replace them for me. In other words, the ending of Job tells us something about how we're not supposed to read Job, by making Job somehow not blameless, because God is pleased with him. But it isn't an ending that's satisfying. And God's answer to Job is definitely not an answer. It's basically, I can't give you an answer now. I cannot give you an answer now. Here's the answer. This is when God really shows up. By the way, this sculpture done by a Brazilian sculptor. It's horrible. It's almost obscene. But it captures well the meaning of the cross. So this is where the story of wisdom goes. And Paul is not unaware of this. Here he uses that theme of wisdom in Corinth. And he says, hasn't God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Wisdom under the sun. Paul's thinking here a lot about Greek wisdom, but it's not just Greek wisdom, because he mentions the scribes, the debaters of this age and the scribes, right? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, in other words, it isn't possible to know God through wisdom. Not the wisdom that can be found. Right? Wisdom can teach you how to live and gives you generally good rules to live by, right? But the fear of God is only the beginning of wisdom. By the way, Job has a text very amazing that he says, it's not the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Job concludes the fear of God is wisdom. Because all the other stuff doesn't work. It's just merely the fear of God. That's it. Right? But Paul goes on to say, for Jews the man assigned Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews, folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us, Jesus became for us, the wisdom from God, righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. In other words, the wisdom of God that he could not explain to Job, it was because there was nothing that could be said about this. It would require God to do something. And what the final answer to Job would be, the first line of that answer would be, Job, not only do I know your suffering because I'm omniscient, but Job, I know your suffering because I suffer, or I will suffer, and I will suffer in a deeper way than you can ever imagine. I'm going to suffer for you, for your friends, and for the world. Right? This is the wisdom of God. This is the answer to Job as it's finally worked out. And look at this. Paul goes on to say in this theme of wisdom, he says, when we preach the gospel to you, we impart a secret, hidden wisdom. You know, this is the wisdom that Job said could not be found. You know, that you look all over the world and you can't find it. The birds fly high, they can't see it. And even death itself says, oh, we've only heard a whisper of it. You know? Here finally it's the wisdom is, the first sentence in it is, God is capable of giving himself. See, this is what Satan didn't understand. Satan came before God and said, God, you're high and mighty and all that kind of stuff. Great, I know that. And you're trying to deal with these carbon-based units, these embodied creatures here. You can't ever deal with them because they can't reach you. There's no kinship between you and them. And what Satan did not know is what Paul goes on to say right here. Look at what he says. None of the rulers of this age, and he's not just talking about Caesar and Herod. He's talking about the rulers and powers of the air. Right? None of the rulers of this age under the sun, right, understood this, the secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed for the ages for our glory. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord. They wouldn't have crucified him. In other words, if Satan had understood it, he never would have entered into the event with Yahweh. Because Satan thought Yahweh could only stand back and look and help if they obeyed and if they kept the rules. Satan never imagined that God could bless in spite of the disobedience and completely identify and actually enter into the life of humanity and so on. And of course this has an implication in the New Testament for how we enter into God's suffering with him. There are texts like 1 Peter where we rejoice, or the command is to rejoice, insofar as we or you share Christ's sufferings. You share Christ's sufferings, not you undergo only your own sufferings, right? That you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Or look at this other interesting text where God's suffering is pictured in another way besides the suffering of Christ. Paul talks about here how the creation is groaning because of Adam's sin, fall. And then he moves on to say, and we ourselves, image bearers, are groaning. Same word, stenanza. And then finally, he comes around to say, the Spirit himself is groaning with us as we suffer and pray. He groans too deep for words. That's how deeply God is suffering. Suffers in Christ, and he suffers now with us as we undergo suffering. And from all the corners of our suffering, whether it's in Africa or Korea or in Saudi Arabia or America, all where that suffering's happened, and God, the Spirit of God is groaning with his praying and suffering people. Now, this is part of the answer to Job. It was already true, of course, right? It was already true in the Old Testament that God was a suffering God. He wasn't just a mighty God who can dispense power and wealth when he wants to, the great king. God has never been like that. But it's finally revealed that he's capable of self-giving fully and Christotelically in Jesus. And of course that gives us an image of what our own mission is in the world, to enter those places where we're suffering, where there is suffering, and to identify. In that sense, by the way, only God's suffering is atoning, but we can also say that the suffering of God's people is part of is redemptive for the world. That's what Romans 8 is talking about. So your suffering is part of the redemption of the world. It's not the atonement for the sins of the world. That's only Jesus's. But our suffering is part of this atonement. A great text in 1 Peter here is, in this suffering you should rejoice, though now for a little while you have been grieved by various trials, since it is necessary, Peter says. It's necessary for you to go through these trials. Why? In order that this very testing of faith, which is itself of far greater worth than testing by fire of perishable gold, this testing of faith may be found to result in praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ in the future. Testing is necessary for the praise and glory and honor, for even Christ and Job were tested. Okay. So, in the last couple minutes, I'm going to just go through a list of where are we now? About an hour and a half, right? Yeah. So I'm going to go just a few minutes to summarize what we've done, which is really a summary of Christotelic reading. That is the points that can be then applied. And there's a couple of examples that you have in your text, and then we're going to have question and answer. So to do this, you have to put up with me. Let's see, where's the keyboard? I have to jump ahead here. I need to get out of presentation mode. There. Okay, then I'll scroll down. Okay. This is just the presentation of one of the examples you have. Okay. Sorry, I'm almost there. Okay, so let's look at just some diagrams to make this very quick. We can read the Bible as a flat book full of truths. And every part that we're reading, we immediately apply to ourselves. So that whether we're reading Ezekiel or the book of Job or Moses, it's just this, we find principles for living, immediate application points to our lives, right? And Jesus is the cross there. Jesus is just one other of those principles, one of these truths that we're supposed to keep in our minds as we live. Right? Of course, we all know he's our Savior too, but in terms of revelation, Jesus is no more important as revelation than anything else, because the whole Bible is revelation. But that model is, you see there's a lot of weaknesses there, because if we read Job carefully, there's all kinds of things in Job we should not apply to ourselves, in the sense that it's not positive. We have to be discriminating about it. And how do we discriminate? We have to have another idea of what the truth of God really is. Right? It's not just a matter, it's in the Bible, therefore it's true, I accept it. No, not quite. Right? There's all kinds of stuff in the Bible. The Bible is given, it must be doing something else. So a better model for reading is this one here, that I call flat episodic. And the most simple version of this would be the traditional Lutheran reading. Not now. The Lutherans are much more sophisticated now than this. This is back in this generation after Luther, where you have the Bible is basically law down here, and then grace up here. There are two different episodes. They're both flat. They have truth within them, but you don't mix them. One does one thing, the other does another thing. A more modern version is called dispensationalism, where the whole plan of God is divided up into however many, 7 perhaps or more dispensations. God speaks and acts towards his people in different ways in each of the dispensations. As I said, this is a better model because it actually sees that the Bible is contoured, and we have to think hermeneutically about what we do with any given text. In this model, you put the text in the right time frame, in the right episode, and then you handle it that way. Right? Of course, God in the Bible does not apply to you anymore, but except for general principles you might derive. Right? A better model yet, though, is this one, which you see sees the Bible as a gradual slope of developing of God's self-revelation in the Bible. Every part of it is important for that slope. Obviously, unless you have stuff revealed at the bottom, you're not going to get a slope, right? You need to have each piece given, but it's moving towards something at the end. This is better than the prior model because it actually says that there's only one slope, and it's going one place. It's going to what God does in Jesus Christ. The episodic model, especially the dispensational model, says there might be more than one goal going on here. But this is problematic too. This, by the way, this is the way I was raised. And when I taught at Westminster, the patron saint there was a guy named Gerhardus Voss. He wrote a book called Biblical Theology, and this is basically the Gerhardus Voss model. But the more I read the Bible and with my colleagues, and we discussed it, the more I realized it's not like this. It's not so smooth. Right? There's the Book of Job that we say. There's all kinds of problems. There's tensions there, right? It's just not so smooth. Right? So that this is the model that I would like to commend to you. That the Bible really is a majestic mountain. And you have a mountain like this somewhere across the river, or this side of the river. I don't know what side of the river it's on. It's a wonderful peak. It comes, but it has all these ravines and little hills next to it. Right? They're all part of the mountain, but not the summit itself. Right? And so you Ezekiel, another example, or Job, somewhere on this mountain, and they don't have a vision of the whole mountain, but they do play a role in forming the actual contours of the mountain. But the mountain has one summit, and that summit is God's own self-revelation personally in the incarnation of His Son, right, at the top. So this would be the model that fits what we would call this Christotelic reading. So the effect of this in reading the Bible, like I would say as I read Job and came to realization what's going on, is that you think, oh, there's the summit, right? And as you climb, you think, oh, there's a summit. But as you keep on climbing, you find out, no, that's really a foothill. And the summit is further up and further in. And we're called to this climactic event where God enters the story Himself. And Yahweh, the God of Israel, becomes part of His humanity. I don't know where that slide was, the summary. I must have. Oh, here it is. So let me just summarize this slide. I'll leave out my talk. You can read the points here. And then we'll go to question and answer. We won't take a break. My voice is okay. Unless you have to go to the bathroom. But essentially what these points all say is to read the Bible in this majestic mountain kind of way, we have to do two things very thoroughly. First, well, we have to start out with the conviction in our hearts that the Bible is God's Word. And it's only people who really believe the Bible that would want to even do this to begin with, because that's the foundation. But within that belief, we have to take very seriously. We have to be very careful, exegetical, even critical readers of what the human authors are saying in every phase of the story. And so, like we did with Job, we actually sent them things as we were reading Job that were at least they were comfortable to me when I first started thinking about them. Right? Wow, Job, how can you talk this way or whatever, right? Very hard, but that's what inevitably I checked with others. We argued back and forth. Yep, this is what's being said right here, no doubt about it. Rather than running from that, right? We embrace it. This is what the human authors are saying, right? And then we move to the next step. And the next step is to say, how is what they are saying, what Job, the writer of Job, is saying, part of the bigger story that comes to its climax, its turning point in the incarnation of God, incarnation of Yahweh. Not the second coming. Second coming is denouement. It is what happens at the end of a movie when everybody's slapping each other. Oh, wow, we survived that and now we're all happy. The climax is the turning point. When what looks terrible finally turns a corner. That's what I'm talking about. First coming of Jesus, incarnation of God. And so a Christotelic reading does both of those phases. It doesn't mix them. You first read very carefully the text. And for that we need Old Testament scholarship. And we need New Testament scholarship. Right? Because that's how we discover the mountain. But we also need people to say, there's a summit. And let's look at the whole thing from the summit. So the system this mountain to people who live in a swamp or live on the plains. Right? And then you can think about it, all these different functions of the church, but we're all moving up and down, playing on the side of this mountain, looking to that summit, and praising God, praising the God of Moses, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, any questions? Or do you want to moderate?
The only thing I can say is, wow!
Good.
This is not what I expected. I thought he was going to talk about the technical issues directly relating to missional hermeneutics, but he did it in an indirect way, just simply expounding the Bible and focusing on one book. I've never heard of an exposition done in such a way. I learned something today. And in one word, for me, it was theodrama. He drew that picture out. I'm inspired. I would like to do something on Job and connect it to Christ and then the whole Missional concept.
We need a volunteer for the students to be Job.
Yes, right. We want to be a Job next time. Anyway, Dr. Taylor, he just demonstrated that for us. This is one of the most fantastic way of, teaching theology. I don't know, Dr. Hoju, this is fantastic, isn't it? I don't know whether you felt the same way, but I was sensing you guys behind my back and I felt like all eyes and hearts were tuned in. We got a lot to learn. I'm humbled today. I'd like to maybe redo all my theological teachings, something like this. And I just want to thank you for that wonderful, wonderful teaching, very holistic. He just took us through the whole Bible, basically, focusing on Christ and then relating it to mission. And so what we want to do is we'd like to spend the next 20 minutes or so asking questions, but I'd like to give you maybe a 5-minute break. How's that? Just do a little bit of stretch, come back fresh, and bring lots of questions for Dr. Taylor.